My name is Ann Sermons Gillis, and I'm on the National Board of the Theosophical Order of Service. What we're doing here is interviewing people that are Theosophists and people that really value service. And I've got someone today that I can tell you for sure values service. I'm so happy to welcome Ananya Sri Ram Rajan. Welcome, Ananya.
Thanks, Ann. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it took us a while to get this together, but I'm really glad that you're here today. And I want to start from the very beginning and just ask you, where were you born?
I was born in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. So it's called Park Ridge. My dad was a doctor in the northwest suburbs of Chicago area, and that's where we lived. I grew up in a town called Morton Grove.
Okay, cold weather, and now you've moved. Where do you live now?
Now I live in Ojai, California. So I'm here 8 months out of the year, and then for about 4 months I go back to Chicago. I have a house there, so.
I see. Nice. And so do you live on the Krotona campus or do you live somewhere else?
Yeah, so I'm living in Krotona now, and working and volunteering here. I assist Maria Parison, who's the director of the school. I assist her with the programming and just the running of the school. Yeah, so it really keeps me busy on top of other things that I do here. So it's
So,
full day.
should we say that your career is Theosophy?
Yeah, a lot of my time is spent dedicated to doing theosophical work, coming up with programs, writing articles, working the TOS. So yeah, it's I have a counseling practice as well. So, but much of my counseling practice and the way that I approach counseling is using theosophical concepts. So I'm slowly bringing spiritual concepts into people's lives in counseling.
Oh, neat. What, do you have a website?
And well, we have a website for the counseling practice. It's it's Lighthouse Counseling. So, but it's from a practice in Illinois. So I only see clients from Illinois because my license is in Illinois.
Your license in Illinois. Okay, great. So is that what you did before you were a full-time volunteer / employee of the Theosophical Society?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, let's see. I've done this balance between theosophy and other things. But I actually got more involved in theosophy in 2000 when John Algeo was president then of the TSA. I went and had lunch with him one day and he said, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "Nothing." I said, "I'm kind of looking for work. My kids are in school. I'm not really sure what to do." And so I got a letter like a week later asking if I would be his editorial assistant on the Quest magazine. And it just kind of went from there. I was working there for about 6 or 7 years on the magazine, and then I moved into the Theosophical Order of Service work more permanently, and sort of they got a different editor. I think by then Richard Smoley had come in as editor of the Quest magazine, so I moved into more TOS work, and I've been doing that, and then I got asked to, and then I went into counseling, and then I got asked to come to Krotona. So it kind of does the seesaw thing. I just kind of ride the wave.
Since we're already talking about the Theosophical Order of Service, you are really the past president now, and I think you still hold a place on the board. And I'm just wondering if you would speak a little bit about that experience, being the president. What did you have to do when you were the president? And, what were some of the things that were very joyful about that, and maybe something that was more difficult for you, just speaking of the whole experience?
Oh, good grief. Well, I remember when I came on as president, I wasn't sure what I was doing. And I think all of us feel that. I think whenever we take a bigger position, whether it's the president of a lodge or the federation or something like that, you don't really go in knowing exactly what you're going to do. And so you kind of, you rely on the other people that are around you. The beautiful thing about the TOS board is that we generally don't have all new people coming on. We always have a sort of mixture of people who've been on the board, and then, if somebody comes in as president and they're new, you've got people there who are going to help you sort of figure out, where are we going from here? And I remember that I came on as president, and this sounds awful, but Trump became president at that time. And there were suddenly all these things that started getting cut. All of the nonprofit organizations that were getting funding were no longer getting funding. And it made me realize how much work we had to do. So it's very interesting to watch how the universe will, you get into a position and the universe will come along and say, here, this needs your attention. And so it was sort of, that these things came up and we just addressed what came up. And, a couple of times we had disasters taking place. So we did fundraising for that. The pandemic happened. So we did fundraising for the medical workers and the local restaurants. Then the Ukraine war happened, and, we did fundraising for that. So it's just interesting how you get into a position, you don't really know what you're going to do, but the universe says, here, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to pay attention to. And then you keep your ears open, because inevitably there are always people that are willing to help you along, and people to talk to as a resource of, well, how do I handle this? Or what does this actually mean? Whether it's budgeting or it's, having to do programs or something like that. So yeah, it was very, very fulfilling, and it was really interesting. I remember having to write my first fundraising letter at the end of the year and feeling a little stuck. And then I remembered about having to ask for money when I was doing a walk for breast cancer. So I wrote about that. That's how I started my fundraising letter. I said, I remember having to ask for money when I was doing this walk for breast cancer, and all I had to do was ask, and people gave. So, it isn't about giving. People will give. People always want to give. People are so much more generous than we give them credit for. All you have to do is ask. So
that's so profound. It's touched my heart. It's like, oh my gosh, people are so much more generous than we give them credit for. I love that. So if we could approach people already with that sense of inner generosity ourselves, and then see that generosity in them, I think then we be a better world. We forget, we are programmed to believe certain kinds of things about people, and we don't let them be new and fresh to us when they come to us. But we can use that idea through fundraising, through the TOS. Well, what was some of the, what do you think maybe was the toughest part of being president of the TOS?
Saying goodbye to board members.
When they got off the board, you mean?
Yeah, it was really, I don't think that there was anything. I will say that during the pandemic, because we actually had this whole plan when I was president we came up with this whole plan about having me travel to different federations and do TOS presentations and so forth, because it was shocking to me with the amount of publicity and the public outreach that we did, that there were so many members in the TSA who didn't know about the TOS. And so we had this whole program and this whole idea about me traveling, and I had talks lined up, and I had places I was going to go, and we were getting ready to buy tickets. And then COVID happened, and it just shut down. Yeah, it just shut down everything. And, you know, and it's funny that that happened. And then just months before that, my sister passed away suddenly. And so it was almost as though, you know, once again, the universe saying, okay, there's a different way of looking at this. And so, you know, when you're grieving, you kind of get caught up in yourself, and rightly so, because when you're grieving, you need to take care of yourself. So the pandemic happening at the same time forced me to have to, you know, kind of just be there and just be present with what I was feeling. But the other thing that happened is that you started seeing how many people were struggling. So it took you out of yourself, because you had to start helping other people. So we came up with that whole program for the medical workers, where we went around. I mean, it was a nationwide program. We went around and got people from around the nation who went out to local restaurants and brought food to the medical workers in different parts of in their local communities. And that was really, it was really, really wonderful to watch that happen. But, you know, the people who came up with those ideas, we had each time you have such a wonderful board to work with. You have these dynamic people, but because of board term limits, eventually they roll off, and you're still there, and you're having to say goodbye to them. And it's sort of like family members going off and living in another country.
Well, so how many years did you serve as president?
I served for 6 years.
6 years. Quite a long time. Well, thank you so much for your service. Okay. I'm gonna take this opportunity to go back a little bit. We said that you were born in Illinois, and I'm wondering if you were raised in a certain religion.
No. You know, my mother and I think my mom was Protestant. I think that's the religion she was brought up with. Although nobody went to church. We went to church for a little while. And I remember being in church and asking her, we keep talking about God. So what is God? What's God? And I don't remember going to church after that. So I don't know. I don't know if she got angry with me. I'm not really sure. You know, I remember she used to say, don't ever question the Lord's name. So, but even though I wasn't raised with a particular religion, my parents were very sensitive to the fact that I was a sensitive child. I spent a lot of time in nature. I remember when I was a small kid, I was growing a garden of flowers, and my mom gave me this little plot in our backyard where I could make my little garden. I had a little fence that went around it. I went and got some seeds and plants at a nursery. And I remember seeing the face of the flower. And so every day I would go and see my flowers and talk to my flowers. And then I realized that the trees also had faces, you know, and that everything was sort of alive. And I was, you know, when you're a small kid, other children think you're just crazy because you're seeing something that they're not seeing. They don't see that everything wants to live. But for me, it was sort of like everything was my friend. And, you know, so you're the weird kid, but that hasn't left me. So,
well, you're not weird anymore, but
no, it's the whole thing is the beauty of all of this.
Yeah, the beauties.
It's sad, but it's also very beautiful. So I lost my parents. My mom died when I was 16, and my dad died 8 months later. And that I was 17 at the time that my dad died, and his sister, my father's elder sister, was Radha Bernier. And so she kept on telling me, you need to come to India, you need to come to India, you're only 17, you shouldn't be living in the United States alone. And it was phenomenal to go to India and find out that my whole family was like this. I wasn't the weird one. I had a family. I was just in the wrong country.
So you want to tell people who she was, who your aunt was, just a little background on her.
Well, she ended up she was the international president of the Theosophical Society, and she was actually the longest standing president.
How many years?
33.
Some
33 years. So,
wow.
and she was the house that she died in was the house that she was born in,
Wow.
and the house that she lived in with when she was married. And it was her husband who took the house and redesigned it so that it could be a house that you lived in, because actually it was quarters that the Parsi community had created. They built it as quarters so that when the Parsi community came for international convention, they could stay there. And so when she went to live there with Raymond Bernier, he took the house and broke down walls and made, windows into doors and, doors into windows and, made it into a home.
And so how long did you live with her? And was Jason there, your brother? Was he there as well?
Jason came to visit. I lived with her for 6 years there. And then I traveled back and forth. I went and stayed with her for about 3 months one time when my kids were really small. I brought them with me. They were 4 and 6. We were there for about 3 months. They had a phenomenal time. It was just wonderful because it's a huge campus and everybody knew who they were. And they were rather Bernier's grandchildren. So, everybody felt they loved her. They used to call her Amma, which is mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always Chinama, which meant little mother. So even now when I go, if I ever see any of the workers there that were there when I was living there, they'll always say, "Oh, Chinama, how are you?" and so forth. But and Jason would come and visit. So I think Jason's been to India maybe 3 or 4 times. He was luckily, he was lucky. He got to be there in 1968 when my grandfather and Sri Ram was still alive.
Wow.
So
Well,
I didn't get to be so lucky. I was born later.
well, you had a unique growing up experience, losing your parents very young and then moving to another country. Can you tell me a little bit about your spirituality, how your journey went? And I'm assuming that this all had to impact you greatly. Just say, how did you get interested in, if you didn't get anything when you were little, how were you interested? Sounds like you started with nature, and then where'd you go?
Yeah, so I started with nature, and this is going to be a publicly viewed, so I'm going to, I guess I might as well just tell the story and just not be ashamed of it. But what brought me into Theosophy was the fact that I was sensitive already. But when my parents died, I was visited by both of them after they passed away. I remember getting a visit from my mother after she passed away and not being able to understand it. And then when I was living in India, and my dad had died only 8 months after my mother, but it took some time after I got to India, I was visited by my father. And I didn't know, or maybe I already did, I don't know, I don't remember, but I was staying in the room where he had died. And so these visits from my parents after they had physically passed away really stumped me. And they somewhat upset me because I couldn't understand how the experience could be so that I could smell them, I could feel them, I was communicating with them, and not understanding how can you be here but you're physically not here. And as a young person who I don't have the answers for that, it really just kind of made me feel very confused. And the beautiful thing was, though, is that I remember my cousin was with me, and it seemed like it was in a dream, but I wasn't dreaming, because I can tell you I can't tell you anything about what I've dreamt, but I can tell you about those visits. I can tell you exactly what my father was wearing. I can tell you what my mother was wearing. I can tell you what they looked like. It was I can remember all the details from it. It was an actual visit. The beauty of the whole thing was that when it happened in India, my aunt was right there to say, okay, this is okay. Don't worry about this. Don't feel confused. There's an answer for this. And so one of the first books she gave me was Life After Life by Raymond Moody.
Uh-huh.
And then she gave me To Those Who Mourn by Leadbeater. I didn't really like Leadbeater's as much. I read it. But Life After Life helped a lot. And then I started exploring more into this whole thing about, traveling to astral planes, understanding the astral body. And it's funny because since then I've had a visit with, my sister after she passed away. I've had a visit with my uncle when he died. He actually came back and told me that I needed to pass a message on to my aunt. I've met my aunt after she died, so it's obviously something that I'm sensitive to. But Theosophy is phenomenal because for the number of things that we question, because we're so stuck with this physical form, Theosophy provides this beautiful framework of how it's not just this physical world. There are these other worlds that exist. We have this other part of us that exists that sometimes we're not aware of. So I've always told my aunt, I remember writing her a letter and saying, I owe everything in my life to you. Because she was the connection to, it was her who instilled it more in me. But I think that the seeds were slowly planted by my grandfather. So just meeting him when I was 3 or 4 years old, being in his energy, that kind of thing.
Well, you had quite a jump start then.
Yeah.
With that. And I, from what you're saying, it makes me think that Theosophists are really visionaries, and that is the vision goes a lot further than just the material world into another world. Mm-hmm. And as you said about being young and having a garden and talking to spirits, that this was not the norm. And it's good to come to the Theosophical Society where people come who have had out of the normal experience as we have had. And think we're weird, and then we find out, no, we're not weird. We're just visionaries. Just visionaries.
The world is weird. Why aren't they like this?
Really?
Can you imagine what the world would be if everybody knew that their thoughts had power and,
I know the first major experience I had when I went to people and asked them in my church, because I figured it was a church kind of thing. And nobody knew what I was talking about. I thought, well, this must be what God's about. This is what church is about. Anyway, it didn't go over like that. Wasn't what people understood God to be. I think people were just dressing up and going to church, which is fine because community is very valuable. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So basically for you, you didn't really find Theosophy. It was somewhat always there. Is that correct? Because of your family background?
I mean, I knew that the Theosophical Society existed because we would go and visit my grandfather when he came. Like when he came to Wheaton, the national headquarters for America, we would visit with him. And then when there were 2 years where we traveled, because he was getting up there in years at that time. We traveled to Europe. And we just sort of followed him around. I don't remember attending many of the talks, but I remember people would have lunch and then we would go and have lunch with him. So I was around these people, and I always remember they were exceptionally kind people, and so I remember being about 3 or 4 and meeting Joy Mills because she was president at the time that my grandfather was international president. And Joy was always so sweet. And I just remember they were these dynamic people. They talked to children and they were curious about children. And you didn't meet many adults that were curious about children, you know, but Theosophists are very different they're different people. So, you know, and then when I went to India and found out, oh, the rest of my family's like this, then you realize, okay, that this isn't as abnormal as you feel like you are. You know, what a great feeling. So I don't know. I think it's, you know, it's kind of like that whole saying about when you're searching for God, God's searching for you, or what the heart is looking for, the heart is looking for you. And there's this meeting that happens, you know. So in some ways, I think sometimes that, you know, if you're, it's kind of like what HPB says, you know, it's dedicated to the few, because there's the few that are out there searching for these things, but what you're searching for is searching for you. So I feel like that's kind of how it comes together.
I love that. What you're searching for is searching for you.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, are there any particular theosophical principles that you've maybe lived by that have influenced you, that have changed you, informed you, guided you?
Well, karma, I mean, you know, I'm sure that's one that comes out of everybody's mouth. But yeah, when you start exploring theosophy and realize how we are just like this tiny, tiny little thing in this vast, vast universe, there's so much that you start thinking about. You start thinking about karma, you start thinking about your thoughts. You know, so that was one of the beautiful things that happened, is that I was sort of this teenager that had no discipline in my life. So when I went to go live with my aunt, she was a very disciplined person. She was up at 5 o'clock. She would do her yoga, her meditation. She had her shower. Breakfast was at, you know, 6:30 in the morning. And then she read the newspaper for a little bit, and then she went off to work. She'd be home by 11:30. We would have lunch. There was a little bit of a rest, and then she would go back to the office. 6:30 was dinner. 9 o'clock, lights were out. The day was over, you know, and she would come by my room if I was doing homework, because I did my college in India. And she'd come by and she'd say, Ananya, it's getting late. You need to turn off the light and go to bed. I have this homework I've got to finish, you know, but she was very much about a regulated life. And in turn, that has helped me tremendously. I have a meditation practice because I think that's very important. I really encourage other people to try to do it as well. You know, I really try to practice this whole thing of watching my thoughts regularly, because you can get so caught up in your own mind. So, yeah, so there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of concepts of theosophy, this whole understanding of the unity of life. That's huge. That's huge. We haven't any clue how much impact we can make, positively or negatively, on somebody else's life, on the environment around us, on our neighborhood, you know. So those are things that I regularly try to think about, especially now that I'm living in a community. You know, Krotona is a community, and so how we interact with our community members, I mean, that makes a huge difference.
How does that work? I think that's an interesting thing about living in a community. Do you live in separate houses? Do you eat together? And how does that work? And just describe that process a little bit.
So Krotona is a little different than Wheaton, because Wheaton used to have a communal eating. It has a communal eating area, but the kitchen's closed. But Krotona, everyone lives in a separate house. You have your own individual house. But we come together for Krotona night. So we have a gathering once a month where, you know, announcements are given about things that are coming up, whether it's a new resident coming to live on the campus, or construction or some event coming up. We've got our centennial that is going to be taking place next year in April 20th of 2024. So, and then there's different activities that happen. We've got the Ojai Valley Lodge runs from our campus. So we have lodge meetings here. There's a Masonic order. They have a Masonic meeting that goes on here. And of course, we have the ES. It's an ES center. So we have the esoteric, we have ES meetings on Sundays. So
did you say you have community eating or no?
No, well, we do every now when we do the Krotona night, we have a communal eating thing. Either we do a potluck or we order, we have food brought in. So, but I mean, some people will have every now and again, if we have a visitor on campus, you know, we had the members intensive earlier. What month are we in? We're in April, so it was in January. But we had like this whole potluck dinner and everybody brought a dish. And then one night we had pizza night, and you know, so I'm always in charge of helping order the pizza, and it's amazing. We've got vegans and gluten-free, and this person doesn't like spice, that person wants more spice. I mean, so
yeah, learning to be with others is a challenge. Of course, that's how we learn the most about ourselves, is when we're reflected in others.
That is so very, very true.
Are you are you a member of a lodge now? There's a lodge there that you get to go to?
Yeah, but I haven't really been able to attend the lodge meetings. I usually have clients on Tuesday nights. And then I also am, myself, Barbara Aber, and Julian Sassano, we all teach the Introduction to Theosophy class once every quarter. So, you know, I teach that on Wednesday nights. And so I generally like to try to keep the evenings free a little bit, because the day gets so busy. So... But I'm also on the Inter-American Theosophical Federation board. I'm the American representative. I'm the representative for the United States. So I'm also busy with that work. So and then I'm on the TOS board, as you have mentioned. So in fact, I got asked if I would be on the board for the Ojai Valley Lodge, and I had to tell them, you know what, I have to step back, because there's also this whole, I mean, part of the balance of living is that you don't bite off more than you can chew.
Seems like we all have problems with that. Yeah, we do. And I understand. I have a very difficult time. For example, our lodge meeting, or we have a study group in Charleston, well, they'll be meeting when I'm at the Mid-South Federation meeting. So there's always something going on that seems to preclude my ability to participate. And a lot of times it's the Theosophical Society, something that
right.
I've got too many conflicts. I have like 3 things at the same time.
Right.
So HB, go on.
I'm sorry, we all do. I mean, this is Theosophy. We can't say no.
Well, and I think it's our hearts that, you know, guide that yes. And our heads sometimes probably need to vote on that. HPV, she says that altruism is theosophy. Could you give us some thoughts about that?
Yeah, that is one of the things that I wrote about a lot with the president's blog for the TOS, because Theosophy is this divine wisdom that lies within everything. I mean, it's not just, it's the divine wisdom that lies within every religion, but it's also, I mean, I like to think of the fact that that divine wisdom lies within every every essence of consciousness, whether it's a flower, it's a tree, it's even a building. I mean, this building comes from
rock.
Huh?
A rock.
A rock. A
Yeah.
rock. You know, Charlie Brown always says, I got a rock. But thank goodness you got a rock, Charlie Brown, you know. So that also lies within us, you know, and it's, you know, I think it's Brother David Stundle Ross talks about the goodness. It's the goodness that's within everything. And I love that. I love that line because it's what keeps everything going. So if we're not working toward connecting with that goodness and helping that goodness along, helping it evolve, then we're being detrimental to our own self. So, you know, in a roundabout way, I mean, Theosophy, which is the divine wisdom, which lies within all consciousness, which is part of the whole unifying force field that's all around us. You know, it is altruism, because that essence just keeps on working to evolve. It's, you know, so we can either participate in it and help it along, or we hold it back to our own detriment. So, you know, and if you really, I mean, that loving consciousness, if you really want to help it along, then you're constantly looking as where can you be the best? Where do you serve the best? And how do you serve the best? So
That's beautiful.
I'm hoping it makes sense. I mean, I get lost in these words sometimes because I can tell you the feeling that I have, but putting that into words sometimes is like, oh.
I had a vision of what you were speaking of, as if we can go around and we ignite the goodness in others.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we ignite it through our own goodness.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You're connecting with that goodness. Your goodness is connecting with it. So, you know, and you're helping it along. And in turn, it's helping everything else along. So that's part of our problem, I think. I think we think in such a dual way. We separate ourselves from everything that's around us instead of looking at it as this is part of me and I'm part of it. So everyone sort of feels that, you know, not everyone, but I mean, you know, the mainstream thinking is that, no, this is separate from me and this person is separate from me, but they're not.
Well, we have a lot of training in that department as we grow up, and we're given names. Everything is given names, and so we are trained into separation. It has some value.
Right.
It has some value. I think that, you know, we don't want to run over each other in the car because we're one with each other. So it's got its place, but it should never lead. It should always follow common sense.
Yeah.
The separation, and maybe honor other people that don't see the same way that we do.
Yeah.
Have you been to any of the Theosophical camps that are in this country?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to. I went to Pumpkin Hollow for a therapeutic touch program because, you know, that's where Dora Coons used to have her camps for therapeutic touch, and there was a program there. I don't know if I shouldn't say this in an interview, but I don't know if I'll go again because I got bit by a tick and ended up with Lyme disease. So, yeah, and I don't think I've ever, I mean, other than having hepatitis, I don't think I've ever been that sick before. But I will tell you, Pumpkin Hollow is absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I'm really grateful to the people who started the Theosophical camps, because it takes you out of yourself to be in simple surroundings, you know, and nature. I'm waiting to go to Camp Indralaya. I can't wait to go to Indralaya sometime.
So you would recommend people going to the camps?
Yeah, no, I do. But really follow through and make sure, especially with Pumpkin Hollow, because they do have issues with ticks. It's just to double check yourself, make sure that other people sweep you and that kind of thing. So,
Well, I'll be going to Eastern North Carolina, right up in the mountains for our conference, and I'm sure there are plenty of ticks there as well.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the downside of being in nature.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. And I live in nature. I mean, I live in nature here. I'm grateful we don't have a tick problem here in California because it's too dry. But where I live about a half hour in Chicago. I live about a half hour from the National Center. And constantly when I'm home there, I'm constantly having to check and, check for ticks and whatever. So it's part of nature.
Well, we're going to switch a little bit and ask you, are there any particular favorite books, either theosophical books or just any books that maybe have guided you in your spiritual life?
I remember doing an interview one time with Dan Smola because he asked me about my favorite books. And one of the books that I mentioned was Light on the Path. And I don't know, you ask a handful of Theosophists and at least two or three will say, oh, Light on the Path. But I really do. I really, really love that book. Every time I read it, I get something new from it. I'm trying to think of, I enjoy Annie Besant's book on the spiritual life. Clara Codd, always, I love Clara Codd's work. And it's interesting that I was going through a bit of I don't know if it was a dark night of the soul. It wasn't like I lost my faith or anything like that. I never lost. Theosophy can't leave you. You try to walk away from it, it doesn't leave you. And I wasn't trying to walk away from it, but I was having questions about the world because the war in Ukraine really bothered me, that where it was leading to, the difficulties that people were having and so forth. And of course, the TOS was just integrally involved in it. I mean, I was regularly communicating with the TOS head in Ukraine and so forth. So I actually started reading, I would go back to my grandfather's book on the Watchtower, or the Watchtower Notes. And I always found solace reading his words. So I feel very, very grateful that not only was he my grandfather, but also the fact that there's this person out there that somehow writes in a way that I can understand and, puts things into perspective. So
that would be a good feeling. Considering you talk to everybody on the other side.
Yeah, they keep on asking him, oh, come on, come sit with me, come visit with me.
Well, I love Marie Hotchner. She was Olcott's secretary, and she had this relationship. Her father kept coming to her and guiding her and directing her. And it sounds very similar to what you're talking about with the talks and so forth with your ancestors.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful connection. I think a lot of us long for those kinds of connections, and sometimes we have to just have a faith in the unseen, even if we haven't seen it or experienced it, to just know that it's there. The complete magic of life.
Yeah, and it's this helps a lot in my counseling practice because I deal with grief and loss, and clients can always tell when you're not telling the truth, or you're just talking off the top of your head. There's almost like this radar that they've got when you're being inauthentic. And whenever I tell them, I'm going to tell you right now that your loved one knows exactly how you're feeling, because love is the strongest connection that there is. They know that I'm absolutely genuine about it. And I don't have to tell them about my whole story of getting visits from the ones who have crossed over or anything. I don't know what it is, but they know that I'm speaking from my truth. And that somehow gives them comfort. But I truly believe that. I mean, there is not much difference between the world that we live in, this physical manifested world, and the world that is beyond that veil. It's just, you're just walking through a different door.
I love it. I love it. Well, I want to thank you so much. And I just wonder if there are any advice you'd like to give, any last thoughts, anything you'd share with us, something you've learned that we might want to hear. Just
off the top of my head, I would just say that choose love. Choose love, don't choose fear. Give everything an opportunity. I was reading, I think I was reading a biography about Annie Besant, and I was amazed at how many things she started that didn't necessarily go anywhere, but she never feared about starting something new. And if you read about the number of things that she started, because it was an idea, let's try it. You just never know where it's going to go. So she wasn't afraid of anything. It's remarkable. So, and that was because she loved Theosophy and she loved humanity. And so she never backed down. So yeah, so choose love.
And for those who may not know, Annie Besant was the second international president after Olcott
Right.
at our international headquarters in Adyar, in case you don't know. An amazing woman in her own right. And if you're a feminist, she's the one you should be studying, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was quite the feminist. She got arrested for with I can't remember the guy's name. It seems like Charles Lawton, and they were passing out
Bradlaugh. Charles Bradlaugh?
Yes, about pamphlets about birth control or something like that. They get put in prison. So anyway, and this is a long time ago. So our Theosophists are out there on the leading edge of possibility, inclusivity, human universal brotherhood, sisterhood, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be a part of this great group. And thank you so much for being with us, Ananya, today. And thank you for your service, for all the years you have been serving and continue to serve.
Well, thank you for your service, Anne. We're really grateful to have you doing these projects, these interviews.
My pleasure.
So,
Namaste.
yes, same to you.